Money. It's everywhere, isn't it? You use it for your morning coffee. The flat white, you tell yourself, is a vital work expense. You use it for rent, that payment that seems to magically increase every single year. You probably dream about having more of it, perhaps picturing yourself on a yacht or just able to afford cheese that doesn't taste like plastic. It dictates so much of our lives, our choices, our daily routines, and often our stress levels. We wake up to earn it. We spend our days trying to get more of it. We meticulously plan how to spend it, save it, and then we lie awake at night worrying about it. Yet how often do we actually stop and think about what this stuff, these coins, these colourful bits of paper, these numbers on a screen actually is? What gives it such immense power over us all? It's far more than just a tool. It's a complex concept, a shared belief system that society has meticulously built over thousands of years, and frankly, it's a wonderfully complicated, often baffling creation. Before the invention of money, our ancestors relied on barter. Now imagine trying to get yourself a brand new state-of-the-art spear because, let's face it, your old one is a bit blunt. You have an abundance of chickens clucking away in your backyard. The spear maker, however, doesn't need chickens. He's got plenty. What he really wants is a sturdy boat. So now your quest for a spear involves finding someone who owns a boat but desperately needs chickens. Then you have to haggle over how many chickens equal one seaworthy or river-worthy boat. Only then can you trade your newly acquired boat for that spear. Sounds utterly exhausting, doesn't it? It absolutely was. This cumbersome process is known in economics as the double coincidence of wants. It's a very fancy term for what is essentially a massive logistical headache and a terrible way to run an economy. Bartering was incredibly inefficient. It severely limited trade. It discouraged specialization. Why bother being a great spear maker if you spend all your time trying to trade spears for things you actually need? And it probably led to a lot of very heated arguments over the precise chicken to slightly used canoe exchange rate. So humanity, being a reasonably clever species when it's not busy, inventing new ways to cause itself problems or arguing on the internet, started looking for a better system. And thus commodity money was born. These were items that possessed value in themselves, intrinsic value, meaning they were useful or desirable for their own sake, not just as a medium of exchange. Think of shiny cowrie shells in parts of Africa and Asia, or blocks of salt in ancient Rome, from which, fun fact, we get the word salary. So your pay packet is literally salt money. Cattle were a very common form of commodity money in many early agricultural cultures. Now, these weren't perfect solutions, of course. Cows are notoriously difficult to divide if you only want to buy a loaf of bread, and you can't exactly make change from half a cow. And can you imagine trying to carry a herd of cows to the local market for your weekly shopping? Not exactly practical unless you enjoy a very chaotic shopping trip, but it was a significant step up from the chicken boat spear dilemma. It made exchange a bit smoother, a bit more predictable, and a bit less like a farcical trading game. Then came the metals, gold, silver, copper. These materials offered several distinct advantages over cows and shells. They were far more durable. They didn't die, spoil, or need feeding like cattle or grain. They were much more easily divisible. You could make small, precise units for everyday purchases or larger bars for significant transactions. They were also highly portable, being much easier to carry around than a grumpy bull or a sack of rapidly deteriorating fish. Crucially, these metals were often scarce enough and difficult enough to extract to be considered consistently valuable across different cultures. This gradually led to the creation of the first coins, typically stamped pieces of metal, guaranteeing a certain weight and purity, often bearing the image of a ruler or a symbol of the issuing authority. Suddenly, trade became a whole lot simpler and more trustworthy. You didn't need to trust that the other person's oddly shaped lump of silver was pure quite as much if it had the king's face on it, essentially promising it was legitimate and not a cleverly disguised bit of cheap tin. So, we transitioned from money backed by shiny gold to money backed mainly by government promises and public faith. For several decades now, this fiat system, with its array of familiar currencies like dollars, pounds, euros, and yen, has been the global norm. Most of us now carry significantly less physical cash than previous generations did. We increasingly use plastic cards, debit cards linked directly to our bank accounts, and credit cards offering a line of short-term debt. We tap our phones or watches on payment terminals. Money, for most practical purposes, became increasingly digital, represented by numbers flickering within a bank's complex computer systems and databases. These digital transactions are still, for the most part, representing the same government-issued fiat currencies, just in a more convenient, less tangible, and incredibly fast form. Think about it carefully. When was the last time you paid for a significant purchase, like a new appliance or a holiday with a giant, inconvenient wad of actual banknotes? For many people, especially in developed economies, it has probably been quite a while. The modern world largely runs on these electronic blips and bleeps that signify monetary value. Then, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, something entirely new and rather disruptive emerged from the digital ether. Bitcoin, launched in 2009 by a still mysterious person or group known as Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin was the first mainstream cryptocurrency. Unlike the digital money in your bank account, which is still fundamentally tied to a central bank and the overarching authority of a government, Bitcoin proposed a radically decentralized system of peer-to-peer electronic cash. It operates using something called blockchain technology. Now, blockchain is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, often by people who want to sound incredibly smart and cutting-edge at parties or in business meetings, sometimes without fully grasping it themselves. Essentially and simply, it's a distributed, immutable digital ledger that records transactions in blocks across a vast network of computers. This distributed nature means that, in theory, no single entity, like a traditional bank or a government, controls it or can easily tamper with it. At least that's the core idea and the revolutionary promise. The potential promise of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and the thousands of others that have followed in its wake is undeniably alluring for many individuals and groups. Proponents frequently talk about the possibility of much lower transaction fees, especially for complex international money transfers, although this advantage isn't always consistently true in practice and can vary wildly depending on the specific cryptocurrency and network congestion. They often highlight the potential for increased privacy in financial dealings, though again the reality of crypto anonymity is far more complicated, with most transactions being pseudonymous rather than truly anonymous and traceable on the public blockchain. The biggest draw for a significant number of enthusiasts is the core principle of decentralization, the idea of taking financial power away from traditional centralized institutions like big banks and governments. It's often framed as a way to have money without states, free from political interference or control. For people living in countries with highly unstable economies, rampant inflation, or oppressive regimes that impose strict capital controls, this idea of an alternative financial rail can be particularly powerful and appealing. It offers a potential escape hatch, a way to preserve wealth or transact more freely. However, and this is a very big however, like a giant, brightly colored inflatable one waving frantically in a strong wind, the world of cryptocurrencies is not without its significant and often quite serious downsides. It is an incredibly volatile asset class. The price of Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies can and frequently does swing wildly and unpredictably, sometimes by huge percentages in a single day, making them a very risky store of value, especially for those who cannot afford to lose their investment. The relatively unregulated space is also unfortunately rife with sophisticated scams, fraudulent schemes, and damaging hacks, with billions of dollars worth of crypto assets being lost or stolen over the years. Then there's the ongoing regulatory uncertainty. Governments and financial authorities around the globe are still grappling with how to classify, regulate, and tax these new digital assets, leading to a patchwork of confusing and sometimes contradictory rules. And let's not forget the substantial environmental impact of some proof-of-work cryptocurrencies, most notably Bitcoin, which consume enormous amounts of electricity for the mining process that secures their networks and validates transactions. It's a financial Wild West, incredibly exciting and potentially revolutionary for some, but undeniably perilous and terrifying for many others. So it becomes abundantly clear that money, whether it's a seashell, a gold coin, a paper banknote, or a string of code, isn't just some neutral, passive tool of exchange. It profoundly and actively influences governments and the very structure of our states. Think about it for a moment. Governments absolutely need money to function, to provide public services like schools and hospitals, to build and maintain infrastructure like roads and bridges, to fund national defense, and for basically everything else they do. They primarily raise this money through various forms of taxation. They can also borrow money by issuing bonds, creating national debt, or, in the specific case of fiat currency, governments through their central banks even have the extraordinary power to create more money, influencing its supply and value. This power to create, control and allocate money gives them immense leverage over the entire economy. Money also fuels the machinery of politics in other, more direct ways. Campaign donations, corporate lobbying and political action committees are all about using financial resources to gain access and influence policy decisions. It inevitably raises the critical question: whose interests are truly being served when these crucial policies are shaped and implemented? And what about the role of corporations in this grand monetary drama? Well, the modern corporation, particularly the publicly traded behemoth, is practically built on and dedicated to the relentless pursuit of money, specifically in the form of profit for its shareholders. This powerful drive for financial gain can, and often does, lead to incredible innovation, remarkable efficiency, and the creation of valuable products and services that many of us use and rely on every single day. It creates jobs and drives economic growth. But this singular focus on the bottom line can also lead to a host of significant problems. Corporations might prioritize maximizing shareholder returns above all else, sometimes at the expense of worker welfare, fair wages, environmental protection, or long-term societal good. They can amass enormous economic and political power, sometimes rivaling or even exceeding that of entire nations, allowing them to influence markets, stifle competition through monopolies or oligopolies, and aggressively lobby governments for favorable regulations and tax breaks. This immense concentration of financial power can, and often does, exacerbate economic inequality, creating an ever-widening gap between the ultra-rich haves and the struggling have-nots. Money's impact on individual lives is perhaps the most direct, intimate, and deeply felt aspect of its power. Your access to fundamental necessities and opportunities, such as quality education, decent healthcare, safe and affordable housing, even consistently nutritious food, is very often dictated by how much money you, your family, or your community has access to. It profoundly shapes your life choices, your career paths, your daily stresses, and your perceived social standing within society. It can unfortunately create a debilitating cycle of poverty that is incredibly difficult for individuals and families to break free from, trapping them in a loop of limited opportunities and constant financial insecurity. Conversely, it can provide a ladder to immense privilege, opening doors and creating advantages that are simply unavailable to others. This isn't just about being able to buy nice things or luxury goods. It's about fundamental aspects of human dignity, quality of life, and the ability to participate fully and meaningfully in society. The distribution of money, therefore, becomes an absolutely critical factor in discussions about social justice, fairness, and equality of opportunity. So, as we stand here today on June 3rd, 2025, with the ever-evolving landscape of digital currencies making significant waves and traditional financial systems often creaking under the weight of various economic and social pressures, it is more crucial than ever to ask some hard questions. Who really benefits the most from the current global financial system as it is structured? Is it truly designed and operated for the broad well-being of the many, or does it, by accident or design, disproportionately favor a select powerful few? The intricate and often bewildering story of money is still being written every single day. From the earliest cowrie shells and lumps of salt to the complex algorithms of Bitcoin and beyond, money has always been intrinsically linked to concepts of power, trust, societal agreement, and, dare I say, a healthy dose of collective make-believe. The next chapter in this ongoing saga is undoubtedly uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But taking the time to understand how we arrived at this point and critically questioning the prevailing narratives we are constantly sold about money and its role is more important than ever. Because ultimately money should be a tool that serves humanity, not the other way around, right? It seems like a fairly basic principle, yet one we seem to struggle with